Great gift for us to be together this evening and to celebrate really the gift of holiness. We're celebrating Sister Annella's holiness. I said at the opening Mass of her cause that I'm pretty sure Sister Annella never thought that 100 years after her death, people would be gathered in her honor and celebrating her holiness. But in fact, many people, both in her own time and today, recognize her example of holiness. And of course, it's a beautiful thing as the church to hold up holiness because that's the goal of our lives. It's what God desires for us, that we would become holy. That is, we would become like God. Sometimes we can have this attitude that our life of faith, our Christian life, is mainly about just kind of having our sins forgiven and getting to heaven, right? And those things are important. But it's actually about becoming like God. God became like us so that we could become like him, so that we could have the life of God within us. And holiness it's not a natural thing. You can't become holy on your own. Holiness is a supernatural thing. Holiness is participation in the life of God. And that life of God is the only thing that lasts forever. Human life doesn't last forever. And so the more we participate in the life of God, the more we radiate God's holiness. And what the readings show us today is that the foundation of holiness is faith. And that if we want to be holy, we not only have to have faith, we have to grow in our faith. So what is faith? Well, faith is a way of seeing. It's a way of understanding. It's a way of knowing. We talk about blind faith, which is really not an accurate thing at all, because faith isn't blind, it's based on evidence. The evidence of my own experience and encounter with God. The evidence that I have of holiness of other people. The evidence that I have of the way the world is. Now, it's not natural evidence, right? Faith isn't based on natural evidence, but there are all kinds of things we know that are unnatural or supernatural, right? And so faith is a way of seeing my life today based on supernatural truths. God is all-powerful. God holds the whole world in his hands. God made everything that exists, and everything that exists still obeys him. And so when I begin to live in faith, I begin to live my life based on those truths, not just on the truths that I see every day and the truths of my own experience, and even less on the lies that can come to me every day through my own experience and other people. A great example of this is what we see in the gospel this evening with St. Peter. St. Peter sees Jesus walking on the water, and he believes in faith that he could walk on the water too, because he knows who the Lord is, and he sees the Lord doing this miraculous thing. And so he makes an act of faith. Lord, if it's you, call me and I'll come to you. And he steps out onto the water. And it's like a paradigm for what a life of faith is. A life of faith means I'm going to do things that most people will think are unreasonable or crazy because I'm living by faith. You think, for example, of the consecrated vocation. We're grateful to have some of our missionary charity sisters here this evening, or the priests that are here. Like, the consecrated vocation to our world today makes no sense, right? But it's a way of living in faith. And really, all faith is, the Christian life is kind of like this. It's kind of like learning to walk on water. Learning to do what I know Jesus is asking me to do, even when it seems difficult or hard or maybe even impossible. Faith allows me to do the impossible, right? Now, the thing about faith is that faith grows through trial. because faith is a virtue. And virtues are like muscles. They grow through resistance. So if you never encounter any resistance to your muscles decay, right? But if you use them and you strengthen them through resistance, they grow. And this is the same way that all of our virtues are. Virtues grow through resistance. And so it's actually normal that a person who sets out in faith to follow Jesus should expect trials, because Jesus wants your faith to grow. And so he allows trials to come to you. It's a normal part of the Christian life. It's spoken about often in the scriptures, right? In the book of Hebrews, it says, when you experience trials, know that God is loving you, because a father disciplines the children whom he loves, so they'll grow in virtue, right? Now, this isn't easy to see, and it's not the way the world looks at trials. It's a way of seeing through faith. We have actually some wonderful examples of this evening. So we have Elijah. Why is Elijah down in the desert by the cave where we hear tonight's reading tonight, right? He's hiding in a cave at Mount Horeb. Why? Well, because Jezebel, the queen, has said if she sees him, she'll cut off his head. He's the last surviving prophet, and he just killed all the prophets of Baal. You remember the story, the fire came down from heaven, and he killed all the prophets of Baal, and the queen heard about it, and she said, if I find him, I'll do to him what he did to those prophets. I'll cut off his head, I'll slit his throat. And so he flees to the desert because he's fleeing for his life. He's experiencing a trial. And God meets him in the trial. And God actually comes to him to show him how he's going to protect him. Of course, St. Peter is an example of faith. Specifically, once he starts to walk on the water, he begins to realize this isn't easy. And the wind and the waves begin to make him afraid. And he takes his eyes off Jesus in the trial, and he begins to sink. And it cries out in faith, and he's saved. And so his faith grows through this trial. And of course, we have before us the wonderful example of Sister Annella. I hope you're all familiar with Sister Annella's story. It's a really important story, and you can buy the book Ticket to Eternity here this evening and read about it if you're not familiar with it. But one of the things I like about Sister Annella's story is that Sister Annella had to grow in her surrender to God in the midst of her sickness. It didn't happen all at once. In fact, if you know her story, she got this mysterious skin disease, this sickness, and she prayed to God to take it away, and he did take it away. But because she was a person of prayer, she kept praying. She had actually a sense that God wanted her to surrender to this trial. And so then she gave God permission to allow it to come back. Because as she was praying, she grew in faith. And she began to see that this sickness wasn't just a natural struggle, but a supernatural thing was happening. And she began to understand that this trial, which became an excruciating trial, an extremely painful trial, she began to realize that this was her way to grow in love. And it was her way to be able to make a gift of her life. This is, in fact, the goal of every human life, and it's what holiness is, making a gift of my life with and for Jesus. But this grew in Sister Annella through the trial. As God allowed the disease to come, and as she was able to surrender to God, she was able gradually to see that this trial was a gift. I hope you can see that this could be the most important thing you ever learn in life. Because all of us in life are going to go through trials. Suffering is a part of human life. And for many people, it's an empty part of human life. It's a part of human life that begins to take away our life and leads to great suffering of depression and sadness. And some of us have been through those things ourselves. But the point is, it doesn't have to be just that. If we have faith, we can learn to see that God is in the midst of every suffering. That's different than saying God wills directly every suffering, but he allows it. And he promises to work through it. And he promises not to abandon us in it. What if we could learn that our trials were a way to grow closer to God? What if we could learn that in every situation I can surrender to God and he will use it for good? It seems that this would be the most powerful thing that we could learn for our lives. Now again, I don't pretend that this is easy. In fact, it's quite difficult. But you might have missed it, but there's a key to this in today's readings. There's a little key that will help us see our trials with faith. And it's the fact of prayer. Elijah goes to Mount Horeb to pray. And in prayer, he's able to discern ultimately the voice of God, a still small voice. And of course, you heard the reading, right? It's not in the earthquake and it's not in the fire. He has to learn how to pray. And as he spends time alone with God in prayer, he begins to hear a still small voice that guides him. And of course, that voice will guide him to safety through the trial. You might have missed it, but it was actually present in the gospel this evening too. Just one little line. The miracle of the multiplication of the loaves and fish has just happened. And it says, Jesus put the apostles in the boat, and then he went up on the mountain, and he was alone. What was he doing there? He was praying. Brothers and sisters, if this Jesus, the second person of the Blessed Trinity, needs to find time to be alone with God to pray, then so do you. And it's punctuated throughout the Gospels. Many times where Jesus goes away from everybody else and spends time alone in prayer. I would argue this is the only way to learn to see with eyes of faith. As we spend time alone with God in prayer, as we read his word, as we meditate on his truth, and most particularly as we bring to him our trials, as we bring them to him in prayer and we relate them to him, he can begin to show us how this trial is something that will allow us to grow in faith. And brothers and sisters, this is the key to holiness that Sister Annella shows us. That actually, if in the midst of my suffering, no matter what it is, I can become a person of prayer, then I can see this trial with faith, and it will actually serve for my holiness.